Dear President of the Royal Society and Nobel Laureate, Sir Venki Ramakrishnan, dear Ambassador Nili Wigan, dear Nobel Laureates Ada Yonath, Richard Henderson, Avram Hershko, dear Dame Carol Robinson, President of the Royal Academy of Chemistry, dear past President of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, Professor Jacob Ziv, dear conference participants, dear colleagues and friends. I'm delighted and excited. I'm grateful to President Ramakrishnan, my dear friend Venki, for the initiative to have this glorious conference on the utmost important theme of structural biology. I'm grateful to Richard Henderson, Nathan Nelson, and Joel Zussman that together with Venki and the advice of Ada have made this gathering possible. It is a day of celebration. Structural biology, the molecular fabric of life, is extremely relevant to today's world. Many believe that research in structural biology could be part of the effort to prevent the next pandemic, hopefully even the current one. This fascinating application of structural biology is a key part of the work to find effective therapeutics, including drug and vaccine development. 5 years ago, my predecessor, Ruth Arnon, signed a historic agreement with Sir Paul Nurse, then the Royal Society President, establishing a scientific collaboration between our two academies. Sir Dr. Ralph Cohen, through his generous support, made this agreement possible. Both academies agreed that building a partnership will lead to the expansion of research cooperation among front-ranking scientists from both countries and open new horizons for outstanding young scientists. The implementation was shouldered upon the successors, Venki and myself, and I think that we are very satisfied with the results. Let me mention some highlights of our joint program. Support of both postdoctorates in both countries, joint workshops on materials for energy, ensuring water safety in a changing climate. These workshops were held in Chichli Hall. Privacy in the technological era, genome stability and dynamics. They were held in Jerusalem, here at the Academy. What stood out across all these activities was the professional networking and genuine cultivating of relationship that took place between scholars. It is precisely this nurturing and encouragement of professional relationships over time that can and does lead to significant scientific collaborations and joint research in the future. I was delighted that the evaluation of the collaboration by the Royal Society was identical to ours and has led to a decision by both academies to extend the collaboration for 5 more years. Venki and myself thought that the opening part of this conference might be an excellent occasion to celebrate the signing of our new agreement, and we'll do it after the speeches. I'm grateful to you all for making this journey possible, in particular, Venki, Julie Maxton, Andrew Elland, Matthew Fargo, and from the Israeli side, Galia Finzi, Joe Cohen, and the entire staff of the Academy, Michael, Yaakov, Kochi, Ruti, Naama. I feel that continuing this collaboration with the Royal Society is an accomplishment of a dream whereby spiritual bond to advance science for the welfare of society at large is being carried between two excellent scientific communities of two friendly countries. I'm proud to tell you The 3 members of the Israel Academy are foreign members of the Royal Society, Michael Rabin, Adi Shamir, and David Milstein. UK Embassy in Israel, with the leadership of Ambassador Nili Wigan, is greatly contributing to this endeavor. Next week, we shall convene in London to celebrate UK-Israel scientific partnership and promote further collaborations. Thank you, Neil, and your wonderful staff. Israel is geographically outside Europe. The UK currently is legally outside Europe. So now, these 2 friendly countries which share common culture soon will share common status as associate members of the European community, a position which I believe will further intensify our close scientific relations. Thank you all. Please.
Thank you very much, Nili. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I was aware of the joint program between Israel and the UK when I became president of the Royal Society, and I also got to know the person who helped fund the first few years of that collaboration, Ralph Cohen, who was a great friend of both countries, and in Britain he was a great patron of both science and the arts, and really a very nice person who unfortunately died about 2 years ago. And so I think it's, the first thing I'd like to say is that I really welcome the fact that we're going to renew this agreement, and once we have renewed it, we will then look for appropriate sponsors for it. And the hope is that we will carry on the rather enjoyable and productive period we've had in the last few years. Now, the first few years, the program was actually oversubscribed. We had to turn away people, and I want to sort of say a little personal note about this sort of collaborative thing. I come from the Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge, and in fact, many of you know that Michael Levitt desperately wanted to do his PhD at the LMB, but there was no room for him that year, so they couldn't take him. He'd either missed the deadline or he wasn't chosen, I think. But he was persistent, and so Kendrew said, look, I will arrange for you to go to the Weizmann Institute and hang out there for a couple of years with my friend, and then you can come back and do a PhD. And that, of course, resulted in his entry into molecular dynamics and so on, which then, in many decades later, resulted in his Nobel Prize. So this sort of thing has been going on a person-to-person basis for a very long time. It's just that having a formal structure makes it easier, because if you have an occasion where you need a collaboration, you have a source of funding, you have the possibility of joint meetings, etc. Now, this also Nili alluded to the fact that Britain has now formally left the EU. She seemed rather optimistic that both of us will have an associated status with the EU. That is indeed the Royal Society's position. We would like to have an associated status, and we often mention Israel as an example of how you don't have to be part of the single market and part of various other things in order to have associated status in science. So far, the EU's attitude has been, well, Israel is different, just like Canada is different. So, so we will have to see. But I think, our scientific friends on the continent really recognize the value of British participation in European science. We're among one of the leading countries in Europe in many areas, especially the life sciences. And so the hope is that in the end, good sense will prevail and there'll be a good agreement on science anyway. And this really goes to the point that, you know, science has always been a global enterprise, and, you know, whatever the politics of various countries, scientists have always found a way to interact. I can tell you at the Royal Society, for example, you know, even during the Revolutionary War with the United States, Benjamin Franklin still continued to communicate his findings through the Royal Society, of which he was a fellow. And Captain Cook was given free passage through American waters, even during the Revolutionary War. And similarly, during the Napoleonic War, British scientists were, you know, had free access to the continent and were not harassed. They had papers, you know, from the Royal Society and from scientists in Europe. So those were really major conflicts compared to, you know, disagreements that people have in politics. So I think people, scientists especially, should really constantly try to reach out to each other and try and work together. So finally, I want to thank a number of people. I want to thank my colleagues at the Royal Society for all the logistics support at our end. And I have to say I've particularly been impressed with the organization of the Israeli Academy. You know, every time I've had a question or some concern, it's been almost immediately responded to. So it's really been a pleasure to work with it. And finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues who helped organize this meeting. This meeting really came out of a conversation I had with Nili, who wanted me to visit Israel. And I said, well, we need a proper occasion, maybe a meeting in my field. And that resulted in my talking to a few people, all of whom I've known for decades. I've known Nathan since I was a graduate student in the 70s in La Jolla. And I've known Joel for a very long time, since the early 80s when he used to visit Brookhaven. And I don't know if Richard remembers this, but I actually first met him in the early 1980s when we shared a car ride from a Gordon conference to New Haven with my mentor, Peter Moore. And Richard and I were sitting in the back, and he was showing me these, you know, pictures of bacterial rhodopsin maps. So I've known them all a very long time, and you know, it's been a pleasure to organize this meeting with them. And finally, I want to thank the people who agreed to speak, many, especially my British colleagues who had to take time out and come out to Israel to present their work. So thank you all very much.
בוקר טוב כולם, ותודה רבה על ההזמנה ועל ההזדמנות לדבר איתם. זה הסוף של העברית שלי, אני מצטער, זה מה יש, אבל אנגלית השפה של מדעים, אז היום אני יכול לדבר באנגלית אם זה בסדר. So, I think I'm the only non-scientist in the room. I do have an MSc, but it's only in economics, so I'm not sure if that counts in this group. So I'll be very quick, particularly in the presence of so many Nobel Prize winners, which is a first for me. But I'm really pleased to be here for the opportunity of the renewal of the agreement between the Israel Academy and the Royal Society. This is a relationship which dates back to 1967. And I'm really pleased to see it renewed again like this, and hearing from Nili about all the activities which have taken place in the last 5 years, and really optimistic for what can happen in the next 5 years. I also really wanted to be here because of the chance to talk about the UK-Israel science relationship, which both Nili and Venki talked about. So ever since I arrived in Israel in the middle of last year, I've been incredibly struck by the enthusiasm I've heard from both sides for scientific collaboration between the UK and Israel. In my first month, I made a point of going to every university in Israel, and without exception, whether from researchers, from chancellors, from the heads of laboratories, I heard a huge enthusiasm for working more closely with the UK. And I'm really pleased that that's been very much reflected in me talking to Nili and colleagues at the Israel Academy, in meeting with the Planning and Budget Commission as well. But also the evidence that we have seen. So the evidence that we have that joint collaboration in research between the UK and Israel is cited 4 times as frequently as unilateral collaboration from either sides, demonstrating the benefits of that research. And because of the strength of that collaboration, the scientific work and scientific relationship has become a key part of the UK-Israel relationship and the work that we do at the embassy. So we have now established a UK-Israel Science Council, which on the Israel side is chaired by Professor Ruth Arnon, who, as Nili said, signed the last Memorandum of Understanding with the Royal Society and will be leading the discussions next week in London for UK-Israel Science Week. We've raised over £13 million for the BIRAX partnership, which has funded 26 joint programs between Britain and Israeli researchers, which has produced some really fantastic science. And when Prince Charles was in Israel last month, one of the people who we made sure that he met was Professor Hossam Haik from the Technion, who demonstrated a product which he produced with funding from that research, which is potentially life-saving and life-changing. We've also got the World Clean Growth Alliance. We have Blavatnik Fellowships for Israelis to study at the University of Cambridge. We sponsored trilateral collaboration between Israeli, British, and Palestinian or Jordanian researchers in areas like clean water. So we're seeing a huge amount of activity. But we believe that in 2020, there's a real opportunity to take that from lots of different valuable activity and put that together into a more strategic relationship, with a vision that Israeli and British scientists will see each other more and more as natural partners for collaboration in cutting-edge research, including as the UK leaves the European Union, as we've talked about, and we look for new ways and new partnerships as we move into that different phase. So that's an exciting vision for 2020, and I think that signing this continued partnership between the Royal Society and the Israel Academy is a fantastic demonstration of that potential. Toda rabah.